Okay, guys, welcome back to learning programming via Android game programming in Java. Kind of a long title. Lesson 3, Part 5. And in the last, in the last 4 lectures, or really 2 lectures, I kind of had to divide up because of YouTube's space restrictions I didn't know about. Um, We've been dealing with sort of the more conceptual end of threading, explained why it's important, and kind of did an overview of how threading works and what threading does. In the very last lecture, we sort of looked at our sample project that we've been working with in Eclipse, and we added everything we need to do to start up a thread and have basically the program drawing to the screen in a loop, so that you can change things in the visual display of the screen and see those changes take place. And so basically, at the core level, that is what allows you to do animation in games. So, I probably will start with something of a review, and then we'll actually go into the code that does the drawing and how the changes that occur while we're running this thread in a loop is allowing animation to occur. So, and for those of you that are sort of driven and motivated by the challenges we've been having week to week in the class, this particular lecture is sort of the key lecture to participating in the current challenge, which is simply to animate your creature or creation or spaceship or whatever it is in some way or another. It's very open-ended. The only thing that is required is for something to change on the screen. It can be something complex, or it can be like a repeated pattern. I have no idea how complex the other competitors are going to be. So anything could win. It might take something amazing, and it might be as simple as somebody tapping his foot, or in my example, somebody tapping their foot. So okay, let's get right to it. One thing that, let's see. Let's start. We are in main game view, which, if you remember from last time, is the view. Basically, the view that gets created by the activity that Android starts up. The Android operating system starts up when our program starts running. And so, looking in here on the onCreate method, which, as we learned in the last lecture, gets called every time an activity is created, we create this main game view, and we set the game view to be the content of the activity. And then once we get into the main game view, we create a thread, and I won't get too much into that, but somewhere in here I create a thread, and then we tell the thread to start running. And once it starts running, we end up in this run method. And this run method is basically performing a loop. And the loop is done by this while statement. And while statement is a programming statement that you'll see in a lot of languages. It's in Java, which is what we're using right here, obviously, but it's also in C, which is one of the sort of the granddaddies of all programming languages, C++, C#. Really, a lot of common languages use this almost exact syntax, and pretty much all languages have some concept of a while loop. And all that a while loop is a way to do something over and over again. And in this case, we are going to run the computer, or the thread in this case, in the main game view, is going to call everything or run the code that is between this opening bracket and this closing bracket over and over and over again, as long as what exists between these two parentheses is true. And I talked about this in the last lecture a little bit. True is basically, this is a variable in this case. The variable is called run, and I named it that up above. Again, this is review from the last lecture. But the run variable is a global variable to the thread. Everything in the thread can see this thing, and but because it's private, only the thread can see it and nothing else. Well, when the thread is first created, I set this thing to false, and so this guy won't be running. If this loop got called right without anything else changing, or the computer called this run method, well, this run variable is false, and so the while method would just basically say, well, I'm not doing anything, and it would just go to the end of this method, this run method up here, and it would just go on through, and then the thread would be dead because there wasn't any work to do. But as I went into in the last lecture, and not important to you to start the animation if you didn't fully understand it, we set the program to running, and we passed in, and I've talked about Boolean variables in the last lecture. Boolean variables are a true or a false, and in this case, we had sent in a variable that set b to true, and then b was set to run, and so by the time, and then we started up the thread, and when we started up the thread, this run method got called. It looked at this variable right here and it said, oh, this is true, I need to go ahead and do this. And basically, since at this point, and you don't have to fully understand this, but at this point, nowhere in my code do I set this to false again once I set it to true. That's something that we would want to do in future lessons, or will want to do in future lessons. But at this point, I don't ever set this to false, so you can count on this being an endless loop. This is going to run until the program dies. And so what's happening in here? Well, earlier on, again in the previous lesson, and even in the lesson before that, when